I'm very lucky to be writing this. Some of us weren't so lucky, but I'll get to that. It started with a lightning storm that began after dark. Dad stopped by my room, his toothbrush still in his mouth, as he pointed to the roof of the house. He said something, but I told him to go spit before we had a conversation. He stepped out, and I heard a loud patooey from the next room before he rinsed and came back. Lightning sounds pretty close. Might be out for rain tomorrow. It was January, and the winter had been mild this year, if you could call it winter. There was very little snow, and it never really got below 30. So when New Year's had been a muggy 78, everyone had just assumed that winter had been called early. Now there was a threat of rain, and that could easily cool things off and give them another cold spell before spring. I hadn't really had to work in the blistering cold yet, and I was kind of hoping to avoid it for a while. Hopefully not, I said, marking the spot in the book I'd been reading. Dad smirked. Take your rest where you can get it, kid. Soon it'll be summer, and you'll be praying for a good rain day. I went to bed not long after, but the rain never came. The lightning persisted throughout the night, but when I woke up in the morning to the rumble of the not-so-distant thunder, I supposed that Dad wouldn't get his rain day after all. He seemed a little grumpy as he came down for breakfast, the lightning still arcing across the sky, and as we got into the car and headed for the yard, he was getting downright ornery. "Look at this," he said, indicating the sky. "It's black as pitch and still no rain. Those clouds are fit to burst, and you just know they're waiting for us to get into the woods before they open up. It's going to make for a miserable, wet day out in the forest." Turned out, Pops was wrong on that one, though it might have been easier if he wasn't. We got to the yard at the usual time, daylight fighting for supremacy, and Garza told us at the morning rundown that we would only be working until the rain started. The supervisors believed it would be about noon, but it was hard to tell in this part of the world. The weather was temperamental at the best of times here, and the rain was just as likely to hit when we were getting ready to go as it was when we were packing in for the day. Regardless, we grabbed our gear and headed for the woods. We were in a little subdivision today on the west side of town, a place I remembered from when I was a kid. One of my best friends had lived over here, and the city was trying to reclaim it so they could use the property again. If there were people trying to keep the forest cut back, it tended to stay occupied longer. This particular subdivision, however, had been mostly empty for about 8 years, and the friend in question had left for college before his parents could move to Bennett. Bennett was a place where you could go out after dark and not worry about foresters. The neighborhood was much the same way it had been the last time I'd been here. The sidewalk had a few more cracks, the road had a little more grass on it, but the houses had gotten the worst of it. The backyards were full of new-growth trees, and many of the houses had greenery coming out of them. The windows had likely been crashed out by town kids looking for some fun, but a few of them were the victims of trees that had grown too close to the houses, or, in a few cases, trees growing out of the foundation. The thunder was a constant background reminder of the rain. A few of the guys looked a little hesitant about cutting with it so close. We were essentially holding big iron lightning rods, and it'd be way too easy for the arc to come down and fry whoever was holding it. Garza told us it was far enough away to make that unlikely, and we believed him. After all, we didn't think he would put us in any more danger than was strictly necessary, and I still believe that. Garza liked to make sure his people came home safely. It happened at about 11. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, and the lightning came down again and again as we prepared to pack up early. We were working near an old derelict two-story, something that had probably been a nice house once, when Ramsey yelled for us to get ready if the drop started coming down. The atmosphere was an excited one, guys preparing for a day away from the woods, and Derek was just asking if I wanted to go get some lunch at Franny's when I was suddenly enveloped in the sound and fury of an angry flash grenade. I was blinded, my vision coming back slowly as I fell back on the lawn. I blinked furiously, my ears ringing like a tinnitus nightmare, and as voices erupted around me, I shook my head and realized I still couldn't hear anything. The ringing had become low grade, almost background, but as they dragged me away from the house we had been working near, I realized my vision had come back as I blinked rapidly. Some people were running towards it, and I blinked as something flared up inside the house. Fire. The house was on fire. Wood! Wood! Someone was shouting, and I realized I could hear them, though it was like hearing the voice at the end of the tin can telephone. I shook my head, trying to get my bearings, and I felt a strong hand hold me down as I tried to get up. "Take it easy, son. You were right there next to the strike when it hit, and it probably scrambled you a little bit." As my mind stopped flashing like a switchboard, I remembered that his name was Ramsey, and that was when I remembered that I hadn't been working alone. "Derek, where's Derek? Did someone get him out?" "Easy, easy," Ramsey said, holding my head as he looked me over. "I don't think you're concussed. I think you just got your battery scrambled a little. We're looking for Derek right now, but we got to get this fire out before it spreads." I could see the rest of the crew trying to fight the spreading fire, but right then I was more worried about Derek. If he was near the fire, then he might be in danger. I got up shakily, Ramsey telling me to be careful, but I had to help. The whole thing reminded me of the war, or helping those under fire, and I was off and running before Ramsey could catch me. I coughed as I hit the edge of the smoke, but the smoke wasn't the only thing obscuring my vision. There was a fog beginning to roll in, a heavy bank that was threatening to obscure my efforts, and I was blundering in without thought. If the foresters got me, then they got me, but I would make sure that Derek was okay first. I could see the fence we had been near, a tree leaning half across it as it made a break for the woods. That's where I saw the chainsaw that Derek had left behind. It was still sticking out of the tree, halfway through the trunk. I coughed, looking around for any sign of my friend, and that's when I noticed the drag marks. The ones going towards the woods. Someone had dragged themselves through a hole in the fence and deeper into the forest. Or, I thought, they had been dragged. I headed into the woods after him, not caring which it was. If I could catch up to him, maybe I could help him, save him, and that way I hadn't been able to save Simon. I had to try, and as the branches slapped at me, I kept following the drag marks into the muddy outskirts. The lightning flashed overhead, still sounding close enough to make me nervous, and as the first drop came down, I felt my foot hit something solid, and I fell hard against the bottom of a thick bush. Derek was still trying to pull himself, mumbling as he looked around in a daze. "Derek!" I breathed, trying to keep my voice low as I took a knee beside him. "Are you okay?" "Shooting! They're shooting at us, Buck! Shooting! They're shooting! They're shooting! They're..." He kept on repeating it as he pulled himself away from the fire, clearly not sure where he was going. He'd been closer to the house than I was, so it's possible he had gotten it worse. I tried to tell him that we had to get moving, but that's when I started hearing the crunch of footsteps. They crunched heedlessly through the underbrush, and I could make a guess who was coming with the fog. "Shooting! They're shooting at us! Shooting! Shooting! Shoot!" I covered his mouth as I held him still. He bucked around a little as the footsteps got closer, but I held him as still as I could manage as he tried to get away. I wanted to smack him, but I leaned down as something crashed about 20 feet behind us and tried to break through to him before he got us caught. "Shut up, Derek, and be still. If the foresters catch us, I'll never let you hear the end of it." Even in his current state, that seemed to get through to him. As the rain came down, we sat amongst the leaves and sticks as the foresters made their way towards the fire. The raindrops were thick and cold as they soaked into our clothes. and Derek stilled as we waited for the coast to clear. The mud sucked at my boots as I tried to stay absolutely still, and as my teeth chattered and my arms shook, I heard something squelch not even 5 feet away. I felt Derek shudder as I held him, and I put my head down. I could guess what he was looking at. I could see the wooden legs, the roots running up to the knee, and silently prayed that it would move on. It stood like a statue, however, likely trying to make sense of us as it hovered there, and I tried to stop from shaking as the cold threatened to sink into my bones. It was probably less than a minute, but it felt like the forester stood there for hours. When it finally took a step and made its way towards the likely extinguished fire, we all sighed in relief. Even so, we stayed there until we heard people calling our names. If they were calling for us, then the foresters must have moved on, and we got up and made our way carefully back to the job site. The house, already a ruin when we'd arrived, was now a pile of ash and bricks. It had burnt to the basement, the rain stopping it from getting much farther. All 4 of them looked sooty and wet, but they were relieved to see us. Garza sighed as we came walking out of the woods, patting our shoulders as if to make sure we were real. I was not looking forward to explaining to your father how you'd nearly been struck by lightning and then run off into the woods. I appreciate your bravery, son, but don't do that again. I was pretty glad I had my nitroglycerin in the truck. We all piled in, the rain pummeling the camper shell as we drove, and the others filled us in on what had happened. The lightning had struck the house and set it on fire, and after getting me out of there, they started trying to put it out. They knew the foresters would be mad if they saw the smoke, and they started trying to get the fire out as quickly as possible. The house had a well, and the well still had power, and as the flames grew, they had noticed the fog rolling in. After I'd run off, Garza had told them to get back to the truck, and as the rain started coming down, they had all breathed a sigh of relief. The foresters had come to inspect the fire, but as the house collapsed and the rain put out the rest, they'd gone back to the woods, taking the fog with them. They'd been coming to look for us, or what might be left of us, when we had come staggering out of the woods. Dad had made a fitful sound when I told him what had happened, and he asked me not to tell my mom about it. No need worrying her. You did the right thing, kiddo, but we should be a little more careful. You could have ended up joining Derek in the deep woods. I sat down to write this after getting a hot shower and getting out of my wet clothes, and it's an experience I don't think I'll ever forget. The rain is really coming down out there, hitting the roof like hailstones, and it gives me a shiver. Derek sent me a text a half hour ago. They took him to the hospital after Ramsey had a look at him, and he's definitely concussed. The ER docs are giving him a week's worth of bed rest, but he says it could have been a lot worse if I hadn't come to get him. He claims he owes me his life. I told him to get better so I don't have to pick up too much of his slack. Derek's a good friend. I'm pretty glad the foresters didn't get him. I'm not sure what we would have done if the rain hadn't started. The house was too big for us to have fought the fire with buckets, and I shudder to think what the foresters would have done if they'd arrived to find us throwing water on it. We would probably have all died, or worse, and I hope the lightning will be over by tomorrow. Though, it does give me an idea for my inevitable incursion into the deep woods. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Heather for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42 for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, we always tell you to come on down to Patreon or check out my member section on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton contributors get their video 12 hours earlier at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. And Ghostly Readers get a book every time I write one on their doorstep. There's actually one coming up here in a few weeks, so if you'd like to get in on that, please go ahead and sign up. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.